Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukatali.
Good morning, I'm Bandula Jayasekara. I am standing in for my colleague Faraz Shaukatali, who's having the time of his life, having a good break, a well-deserved break for Faraz. The politicians continue to hoodwink the masses. We had last week one member of parliament, Suresh Vadivel, taking petrol cans to the parliament. He knew people will stop him. The same thing happened when in the previous government Vimal Veeravansa trying to fast to death. He's very much alive. This is what happens. Politicians continue to hoodwink us, and it's time that we tell the politicians that masses are not asses and stand up. Now we have our special guest today, Professor Rajiva Vijayasinghe. Why Rajiva is here? Because he's written a book, says Reform, Rights and Good Governance, which will be launched tomorrow with the speaker Karu Jayasuriya and Dr. Sarath Amnugama. Good morning, Rajiva.
Morning.
First question, what made you write this book? And I will also ask the second question. You have dedicated this, I think, to two beautiful people. One person I knew very well, that is late Bishop Lakshman Wickramasinghe, and then you have also dedicated this to Father James Pathinatha. Why did you write this book and why did you dedicate it to them?
Well, I found myself unemployed, as you know, in August this year.
Yeah.
And I thought, what could I do gainfully? So I got together, in fact, a series of 6 books. 4 of them are collections of articles. 2 of them are history of the Rajapaksa years, called Triumph and Disaster. The first, Success in War, will be published next month, and that will be followed by Failure in Reconciliation. This particular book, Bandula, was, I thought, the most important because this was the principle on which, as you know, we stood with Maithripala Sirisena in January this year, because we felt there was a need for good governance and for reforms. I'm really sorry to say those reforms have not happened, the structural reforms we wanted. The first section, or the second section of this book, is Rights, which is a series of articles I wrote in 2012 and 13 when I was convener of the task force for the National Human Rights Action Plan. There was an interministerial committee, but the minister entrusted the task force to me. We did a lot of good work with all agencies which were very positive, but in the end I resigned because nothing was moving. And nothing was moving because there was no dedicated ministry. And I told the president to have a ministry. Mahinda Samarasinha would have been the ideal as he'd been before. But I said if the president wants to keep it himself, then make Mahinda deputy, because he's very dedicated to this point. I've dedicated it to 2 people who I think are outstanding. One is Lakshman Wickramasinghe, who was my uncle, Bishop of Kurunegala, chairman of the civil rights movement. And he had a lovely relationship with even Mrs. Bandaranaike. He was very strong on the way that government dealt badly with the 71 insurgents. But, Mrs. Bandaranaike was very fond of him.
And I know, I was telling this to you because that just before he died, I think the day before or 2 days before, Mrs. Bandaranaike had sent a beautiful bouquet of flowers to the hospital. This is what I know for it.
She was really a very great lady who was prepared to take
Bishop
criticism.
Lakshman Wickramasinghe was known as the good Wickramasinghe.
Well, very interestingly, my uncle stood 4 square against his brother Esmond, who was a solid UNPer politically. Personally, he liked him very much, and Esmond was a lovely man, a warm-hearted personality. But politically, Lakshman was very strongly opposed to him. He was very strong about the riots of July 1983.
And I know he was deeply hurt and pained by these 83 riots.
Deeply
and he
hurt
wrote articles. There was a famous sermon he delivered.
Yeah, and I think it was Father Sidney Knight who told me Lakshman was very upset to find that people who had brought up in Lakmahal, the house in which he had been brought up, had been associated, because Esmond was a great friend of Cyril Matthew. And I think that was a tragedy, that because of internal UNP power plays, Esmond was not very fond of Premadasa, he wanted Cyril Matthew. But Cyril Matthew's racism, I'm glad though that Esmond stood against it. Later on, he turned down the whole Matthew thing, and I think stood by some of the pluralistic ideas that his brother had stood
Your
for.
other dedication,
But the
James
other
Pathinatha.
dedicatee is James Pathinatha, who was this priest who was in Mullawaikal towards the end. This cover photograph is the church at Valenamada, where the boys and girls whom the LTT had conscripted sought refuge, and James stood up for them when the LTT came to take them away, and he refused to let them go. But the next night the LTT put a shell on his house. He told me it was the LTT, they wanted to get rid of me. But fortunately he survived, but his leg was broken. He was evacuated by
Where
the
is he now?
ICRC. He's looking after an orphanage on the road to near Kilinochchi. I went and saw him. I saw the kids. In fact, it's a beautiful orphanage. There are nuns there. I saw the girls
This is what
there.
I would want to tell the viewers, tell Sri Lanka. These are the real heroes of Sri Lanka, who, I'm sorry to say that some people like blame the Sri Lankan Tamils. So the South said, okay, they were supporting LTT. LTT said they were supporting, but they stood up for what is right. Am I right?
James Patinath was a great hero. The LT tried to kill him. He survived. He used to come to my reconciliation meetings, which I held in the very small divisional secretariats in Mantai East and in Tunukkai, very neglected areas in Mulattivu. Very good ideas. And you know, he looks
They are
after
the ones
children.
who should be Deshamaniya,
They should
not
be
not
celebrated, and that
not
is why I
these
put
other-
him here.
other odd
Because
catchers.
you know, here's a man who stood up for Tamils but stood against the LTT. And I think that was done by a lot of Tamils. It hasn't
Yeah,
been
they are the real
recognized.
heroes.
It hasn't been recognized enough. And I think one of the big problems with the Rajapaksa government, and I blame Basil, not Mahinda, is that, you know, he thought that he should take full charge of reconstruction. And I kept saying, consult the people.
Oh, you're talking about Basil, you know, no wonder. I have got figures. He has spent 1,596 lakhs on his domestic air travel. For reconciliation or what?
No, you know, I have always felt, I wrote about this, he was not interested. I still have great regard for Gotabe. You know, I told him this BBS flirtation was wrong. But Gotabe did a good
But
job
Basil
with regard to the
spending
war.
so much of,
Basil
you know-
was a problem, and I think poor Mahinda Rajapaksa is suffering largely because of that. In fact, even President Maithripala Sirisena, in his letters, has made it clear that it was Basil who tried to sideline him. It was sad because, you know, Basil didn't want competition, which is a pity because he's not as able as his two brothers. So this was a tragedy.
This is sort of insecurity. Now,
It's
Rajiv,
insecurity, I think.
moving on,
Yeah,
as a professor, you're academic. Lakshman Kirialla says government favors setting up of private campuses, which I think is good, because why are people objecting to private campuses? There are plenty of private schools. Why don't they object to those? What's happening?
It is a complete lack of both transparency and lack of thinking ability, let alone private campuses. This whole country has no free education. Everyone goes for tuition. That is outrageous. No one objects to it. No one says tuition should be at least banned or restricted. Children spend parents spend heaps of money. Children waste their time. And a couple of days ago I was down south with one of my former students who does English. She does a lot of tuition, but she teaches in school. She says very few teachers bother to teach in school. They make the students come afterwards. This is not free education. And you know, I used to tell my students, you all are talking about free education. How about if you came here through free education and they all had been to tuition
What
classes?
do they say to that when you
They've all
question
been
them?
to tuition classes. And they said, "Ithin Guru Nani." So I said, yes, but that is what you should be protesting about. You should not be attacking the opportunity for people to go to private education. Of course, it is important to make free education sacrosanct. No one should be deprived of education if they have ability because they have no money. That is essential. Now kids are deprived because in the rural schools, A, they have no teachers, B, they don't even have access to tuition, assuming they have the money to go.
And
We are not strengthening our rural schools. One of my books, which will come out I think about March, is all the stuff I wrote about education. I am proud of the fact that is the one area I did a lot in. You know, people say I know about foreign affairs. Everything I know about foreign affairs I learned from people like Dan and Tamara. But education, reintroduction of English media, would I think been impossible if, you know, I had not had full support from Tara Dimela and Chandika Kumaratunga, who was very supportive when she was president. She was very good about education because she's
So
the
then,
one who...
Raju Kami, what's the big how of private universities? We have private, then people should object to private hospitals.
Of course.
What's happening?
And one of the reasons our health service still continues very well is that people who can afford it go to private hospitals. Our health service is still very good. Anyone who needs free education. I went yesterday to see my father's former driver, who's very ill in Karapiti Hospital, but he's getting a fantastic service, and I spoke to the young doctors there. I mean, they were so busy but so helpful, and they care. But of course, a lot of the work that might have gone into private hospitals is now siphoned off into, might have gone to state hospitals, into private hospitals, so that the state system can cope with the worst off. Education must provide things of the highest standards. I'm happy to say that our government hospitals are really better than private hospitals in many respects.
You know, what I'm trying to say, they can object the same way we could save lots of money. If we have private universities, we can keep this money, but we have millions of dollars are spent to send several children, mostly, sorry to say, politicians abroad, to educate them. We can have this money
I feel very sorry for SP Dissanayake. SP actually produced a good draft act, but the legal draftsman department delayed. By the time it was ready, the agitation had grown. You know, Mahinda Rajapaksa should have done the reforms in 2010-11. He was interested, but then he told SP exactly what Jaya said about his white paper: let it happen, but don't do it officially. You know, people like Vimal Williams were protesting. But what you have to do is make it very clear that that state education will not be cut. But now state education is a mess. When I was minister, I think I worked very hard when I was minister. I used to meet students every week, and then I discovered that the syllabuses in state universities in the arts have got worse. Our poor economic students, my students at Sabragamo, don't study Milton Friedman. How can you go into the modern world? I must say things like Morato University are still cutting edge. Some of the science faculties, Jayawardenpura management, are still extraordinarily good. But the arts faculties, and then I was horrified because I thought, you know, I had been dean. I said, did I allow this to happen? My students told me, sir, after you went, they reduced the syllabus further. So no one is checking on this. The UGC should be checking on standards, not interfering in appointments.
Government Medical Association, they are against private universities, but they want duty-free vehicle permits. Now, I feel that then you should give your academic, you should give duty-free vehicle permits to principals, people who are educating. What are your views?
My view is that the whole idea of duty-free permits was a appalling introduction by Jayawardenepura to bribe his MPs. In fact, in this book, I say what I told Karu Jayasuriya in January. I said, cut the MPs' duty-free permits, but let every MP have a car for use while an MP to be returned. Because you and I know perfectly well, most MPs sell their duty-free permits. In fact, when I didn't use mine in my first couple of years, ministers came to me and they all think I'm an idiot and I don't know how to do things. We will sell it for you and
so what happened to your duty-free?
No, I finally gave it to a friend of mine. I didn't get any money for it because this was the person who, when my car was withdrawn, actually immediately gave me a car. And then when I realized he wanted to buy something, I said, you can use this permit because I don't want to have it wasted. But I'm certain, and he offered to sort of give me a car instead. I said, no, I can't take anything from you.
But you're talking of MPs, so it looks like the MPs have won their rights again.
It's outrageous now. I mean, this whole budget. You know, the reason I feel sad is the budget had some good ideas. But because it was not done with consultation and proper planning, a lot of things have been reversed and the reforms we need are not going through. And I think this is a clear example of the failure of our parliamentary system, because in any other country, a budget is prepared after consultation. This is another thing I say in this, and I told Karu Jayasuriya about this: develop the consultative committees. Of course, you know, someone said, maybe when I mentioned this earlier, one of the government ministers at the time, I think the then Secretary of the SLAP said, well, you know, some things the MPs may not know enough. But that is why we need a new electoral system. We need an electoral system that allows every party to choose a good candidate for each electorate. Of course, the good candidate has to be popular as well. But when you have one person for one electorate, the screening process is better. And you can go back to the sort of educated person we had in Parliament in the days I knew Parliament, in the 60s. The majority of MPs were very capable. But under this mad electoral system we have, what is privileged is the capacity to win votes over a district, which means you have to spend a lot of money, you have to acquire a lot of money, and then these people whose sole talent is to win election in preference to their fellow members, then think they should have executive responsibility. Executive responsibility should go to people of proven ability, not just vote-winning capacity, and not vote-winning on this
that's
system.
What's happening.
Of course, this system that JR introduced is utterly pernicious, and the President pledged reforms, but unfortunately was catapulted into having the election too early, and the pledged electoral reform, which was the most important of the reforms, did not happen.
But the but the president can take control even now.
Well, I hope the president can, but he's in a bit of a difficult position because due to, I think, the internal infighting that happened in August, I think the balance in parliament is not what it should be. I think if there had been a straight election, it should have been a much more even balance between UNP and SLFP. And perhaps the SLFP might even have been ahead, but not a full majority. But at the moment, I think the president is not as strong as he should be. Even though I think the rate the UNP is going now, it will prove that he is strong. But I'll stop now.
We have to take a short break. That shows that the MPs have won the rights and people continue to suffer. We'll be back after a short break.
First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Welcome back to the show. Faraz Shaukat Ali is on holiday. Rajiv, Nisha Biswal is in the news again. The way I see it, she is a assistant secretary. But where in this small island of ours give prominence to every person, unfortunately. Are we getting too close to the US?
Well, I think we should be close to everybody. And I think one of the problems of the last government was it did not manage its relations well. But this government certainly is making the enormous mistakes that J.R. Jawaharlal did in the 80s when he put all his eggs into one basket, which was the Western basket. You're probably aware that he actually sent Hamid to England to ask the British to invoke the defence treaty in case we had a threat from India. And Miss Thatcher, apparently, one of my friends was in her private office, he told me she was very keen to say this, but her advisor said, you can't do it, India is the powerful area here. You see, in those days, unfortunately, JR was still fighting the Cold War. And India was the great enemy of America during the Cold War, apart from the communist world, because they were the people who were non-aligned.
And Pakistan was supporting the US and India was close to the Soviet bloc.
Ironically, America was using China then against both Russia and India. But even the Americans realized you can't fight India on its doorstep. Although JR was trying to sell them the Trincomalee oil farms, he gave them the Iranaville Voice of America. India was pretty angry about that, and they came down hard. Now, I think the lesson we should have learned from that is you have to have good relations with India.
And China, we need to be close. They are our neighbors.
As I've written my book on my foreign articles, it's going to be called The Mango Tree. It's based on the legend of, how Devanam were converted to Buddhism. And that myth, which is about neighbors, about concentric circles. India has to come first, then China and Asia. But of course, we have to be friendly with the West because we're also in the circle in which they belong. But unfortunately, I think this particular government, not Maithripala Sirisena, who I think is traditional SLFP, but the UNP, the JR UNP, not the Dadisen Naka UNP. The JR UNP, spearheaded now by Mangal Samaravira, ironically, but Mangal, as you know, his father became quite close to the UNP in time. They, I think, believe that now since America is quoting India during the Cold War... I don't think we should
blame Mangal. It's the Prime Minister who gives
but he's the Foreign Minister. I still remember once when I told the President, Mahinda Rajapaksa, when he was badly advised about the G17, he said to my Foreign Minister, I said, your Foreign Minister knows nothing. He said to me, but he is my Foreign Minister. Which was but Mahinda Rajapaksa told me,
but I must
he said, if I want to change to talk the Foreign Minister first. This was Bogalagama, he listened. He was willing to learn. And that is how Mahinda became chairman of the G17, which Chenuka Senwanta promptly destroyed.
But Mangala is considered the best foreign minister after Lakshman Kadragama.
Well, let me put it this way, there isn't much competition. Lakshman Kadragama is there. I think Mangala is certainly better than GLP was.
He's trying to reach out,
Bogalagama was not bad, although I think there were a lot of things that were wrong about him. He listened to advice.
I don't think so. Anyway, it's a very interesting question. Since we are talking of the US from a viewer, Rajiv, I will read this to you. Even though you said this present government is close to the US, the viewer says previous government got big support to win the war. No one can deny that. Mahinda Rajapaksa also signed military agreement with the US in 2007. In fact, best relations with the US during MR's time. Right? It also says Sri Lanka acquired US warship. It joined the hunt for LTT ships during 2008. Of the 8 ships destroyed, US provided info for the destruction of 4 ships.
My whole point was that, and I say this in the book, Mahinda Rajapaksa did a fantastic job up to 2009, balanced everything. In fact, I think for a couple of years more he did well. But then what I call the influencers around him destroyed things. For instance, in 2009, we told him, why don't you answer the US State Department report written by John Kerry? No answer was sent. There was arrogance. There was complete ignoring of American concerns. We should have addressed those concerns. In particular, we should have addressed the Indian concerns. India was ignored. Now Ranil thinks, and I think again India is being ignored, that because the US is quoting India, if we keep close to the US, India will follow suit. Indian officials are far too clever to swallow the idea that because America is friendly with them now, America will be friendly forever. American foreign policy is volatile. Saddam Hussein found that to his cost.
And they have conditions always.
Well, exactly. So India, which is a strong nation, is, I think, well aware that they have to be circumspect. Unfortunately, Ranil like Jaya does not understand the word circumspection. So the problem is that we will put all our eggs into the American basket. America can change. Next year, Hillary Clinton will be different from Barack Obama. I still remember, you were talking about the good
you're
relation.
saying, whom do you think? Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? That's interesting.
Well, it's Hobson's choice, isn't it? But let me put it this way. I still remember in 2009 when Bob Blake, who was a good friend of Sri Lanka during the war,
Definitely,
he pointed out, he was asked by someone who works Peace Secretariat, Bob, why have you changed? And he said, I serve a different administration. James Cladd from the earlier Republican administration told me the problem is there are bleeding hearts in the Obama administration. They are doing exactly
like
what we did.
Susan Rice and Samantha Powers.
Yeah, but they are now doing exactly what the Republicans did with regard to Guantanamo, secret renditions, all the nasty treatment of Islamic militants. So to salve their consciences, they will attack Sri Lanka. And this guy told me that is why, Bob also has to be against us. But Bob was a good friend and we should
It's the
have
same
actually
thing,
stayed.
Rajiv. I remember Jane Dixit told me, he was in retirement in Gurgaon when I had done an interview with Dixit.
Yeah.
He said, I have good Sinhala friends, good Tamil friends. I was demonized, but I did it for my country.
But of course, every diplomat does that.
Yeah.
We have to recognize that. But you see, Ranil thinks that since they're good friends, now they will be. And they're ignoring the fact that we have to keep India happy, and that should be the core of our foreign policy, not at the cost of our independence. But what we have found with India is they don't want to take our independence away, provided we are not a threat.
But
America is different.
But
because
Rajiv,
America's relations are patron-client.
Yeah, but Rajiv, we are always, this problem in these countries, we are always, others are talking of their interest.
Yeah.
We don't have to protect their interest, we have to protect our interest.
You see, one of the points I make in this book about good governance is you need think tanks. So I say for foreign policy, we should develop think tanks. Lakshman Kadirgama tried to do this. I was on the board of the BCIS. He set up an excellent board. We have done nothing with the Lakshman Kadirgama Center. That was killed by Bhogalagama. It was killed by GL Piris. It's been killed by Mangala Samarula. Same for the BCIS. There is no thinking going on.
We can learn from India. There are plenty of think tanks
I had suggested, exactly. And we had this wonderful resource called Palihakkara. He was secretary.
Who's our governor in the Northern Province.
He could lead a think tank. Rohan Pereira, who's now in America, and you don't need to be physically present. Dhananjaya Tilaka. There are lots of people with great experience in foreign policy who know to handle the world. They should be allowed to lead a think tank that suggests policy together with involvement. When I was secretary, advice on reconciliation, I tried to have monthly meetings, especially for civil-military liaison. Gotabaya Rajapaksa sent me bright young officers. The foreign ministry didn't send anybody because they were not interested in the local dimension that they then have to sell.
Rajiv, moving on.
Yeah.
You're a professor. You're unemployed. What are you doing now?
No, I'm not actually unemployed because Mahinda Samarasinghe asked me to help him. I said I was willing to help if it was a part-time position. So I'm assisting him with an area which I found that during the last 5 years, that was the area I used to keep telling Mahinda Rajapaksa and Dalasala Perima has to be developed, vocational education, where we haven't become cutting edge. 15 years ago...
So are you getting paid by Mahinda? I mean, there's employment.
I get it's a part-time position. But I'm, I think, working quite hard. He told me, I know you'll be working full-time soon. I said, no, I'm not, because I need leisure and so on to write. But it's interesting, and I think a lot of reform needs to be done. And in particular, Mahinda understands very clearly the need for soft skills for vocational training, because 15 years ago, when I was on National Education Commission, we recommended upgrading vocational training.
Do you miss being in Parliament?
Let's put it this way, I think I contributed a lot to the committees But we needed restructuring of the committees, and since this government ignored one of its first pledges, which is changing of standing orders to empower Parliament more, I don't know that I could have done much more. But I still think that in terms of structural changes, partly because of the training I got from my father, I understand more about what Parliament should be. Whether they can be that is, I think, not something we can address easily until we get the electoral reform, which was another prominent pledge in the President Maithripala Sirisena's manifesto. And I'm really sorry that the January manifesto has been ignored to such a large extent, both with regard to the structural reforms and the administrative reforms. He says, for instance, that the key for service delivery should be the divisional secretariat. You know, he understood very well that times have changed from the government agents in the province, it became the district. Now it's the division that should act. But nothing has been done about that. I told Kadu Jayasuriya as Minister of Good Governance, why don't we move on this? Because I had worked with the UN to get a very good position paper on this. And Kadu was very enthusiastic.
But nothing
happened.
Then,
Kadu then told me rather sadly, he said, but I don't have these, they have been given to Joseph Michael Pereira. And poor Joseph Michael Pereira didn't understand these at all.
But people, what happens is people, they are given questions, if they can't, they should say, no, we don't know, but they take it. But another question is...
well, I didn't. When I couldn't work, I went.
Yeah.
I have always felt...
that is, we respect that.
And I have also always felt that you can work, you can do anything.
No, we really respect that you resign. I think that's the way things should be in this country. You know, if you can't, you go. I mean, that's very honorable. But many accuse you of being a loose cannon. But I personally like loose cannon. That's the way things should be. What have you got to say to our viewers?
Well, I don't think I'm really a loose cannon. I think the areas where I was entrusted with responsibility, I performed. In the sense that English medium education was introduced by me because I had the full backing of Tata Devil and Chandrika Kumaratunga. I transformed English at universities. It used to be a very academic thing where, you know, one professor said, our students go to Cambridge for postgraduate. I said, you know, we don't send hundreds to postgraduate. We want people who can go into English teaching. And I expanded. Because I allowed people without English advanced level the chance to get English degrees. And many of my products are now in senior positions in schools, in training colleges. It was nice. I was doing a workshop. And the most intelligent comments came from former AUC students because I gave them to draft out what the syllabus should be like. So it's nice seeing those students who came from village backgrounds who didn't have English when they came.
But it's good to think out of the box.
And I think one has to. You know, similarly, I think it's extremely important that I introduce soft skills in university. You know, one of the problems we had the British system. And I kept saying we can't give specialized education because our school system doesn't give the general skills that people need. So in that case, what happened is that I introduced at Sabrogo for the first time core courses. Before doing it, the Americans offered me a visitor trip to America to watch the 96 election. I said, I don't want to watch elections there. But if you take me to look at the way core courses are developing, now our people haven't done that. Core courses is soft skills which every university graduate does, and Harvard, which introduced this when the British system didn't at the end of the 19th century, now have a menu of 10 skills.
Raju, thank you very much for joining us. Tomorrow this is the season, the festive season. Tomorrow we'll have something different. A person who's come from Canada will join us, and it's something different for the festive season. Check out for tomorrow, same time. Thank you very much and good morning.
Newsfirst, Newsline